Hello, my name is Jennifer Lisson, and I'm the founder of the WHIT program. I'm thankful for each and every one of you sitting here today who are ready to become tutors. I've seen the difference tutors make in these children's lives firsthand, and I can't wait for all of you to join our team. Let me tell you a little bit about the WHIT program and where it all began. WHIT, it stands for Weekly Hands-On Independent Tutoring, and it's named in honor of my daughter, Whitney. My daughter passed away in a tragic car accident involving a drunk driver when she was 20 years old. Whitney had a huge heart and always looked to serve the less fortunate. I was really inspired by her compassion for others to become a CASA volunteer, which stands for Court-Appointed Special Advocate. I was matched with foster children and advocated for their best interest in court. During my time as a CASA volunteer, I saw that most of my children were behind in school, and there was no way to help them. At one point, I had 2 young boys who were really far behind in their classes. School was becoming a place they didn't like to go, and their self-confidence was dropping each time they failed an assignment or couldn't complete their work. I had a tutor lined up for them, but CPS, or Child Protective Services, would not allow it due to confidentiality. It really broke my heart to see these children in need of help, and the people who were willing to help them were unable to connect due to the lack of a program that coordinated with CPS. So I decided to create that program. We are the only program like this in the nation that's dedicated to give free tutoring to foster children. There's nothing else like it. Let me share some statistics with you. Many foster children are behind their peers in school. Only 62% of foster children will graduate high school. That's the lowest percentage of any group tracked by the state of Texas. That's lower than even homeless children. Imagine that, even a homeless child is more likely to graduate high school than a foster child. And of those who graduate, fewer than a third will go on and attend any form of post-secondary school, such as college or trade school. Only 2% get a degree. Our goal as a program is to help catch these students up academically so that they can graduate high school and have hope for their future. We connect members of our community who are willing and able to become tutors, such as yourself, with foster children in need of academic support. From there, you will meet weekly with your student, work to complete schoolwork, and build the skills they need to become successful. In just 1 year, we've already seen fantastic results. Grades have improved and attitudes have changed. Several students have been able to completely turn their lives around. The WHIT program has been so successful that after our very first year, we were approved to go statewide. Also, we've been asked by several other states to provide tutoring for their children. This is all thanks to the quality of tutors we have. As a tutor, you will have the opportunity to make a difference in the life of your student forever. Later in the video, I will walk you through the steps to becoming a tutor and what it looks like to tutor through the WHIT program. Thank you very much for volunteering your time and making a change in children's lives. You will make a difference, and you are making the world a better place. We at the WHIT program hope you find this video informative and full of information you didn't know. Once again, we thank you. In this training, you'll get instruction and ideas from 2 respected university professors, Dr. Elaine Stribling and Dr. Patsy Clear. Both are incredible teachers, and both with different ideas and different deliveries that can be beneficial to you and your foster child. They're both considered experts of their field in education and have amassed about 72 years of teaching between just the 2 of them. I know you'll receive extremely useful information to apply to your student. There will be some questions at the end, so make sure you take notes.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. Hello, my name is Elaine Stribling, and this is my friend and colleague, Patsy Clear, and we will be presenting the WHIT training program. We are very excited that you have decided to be part of the WHIT family and spend your valuable time helping young people. The training is divided into several modules. Read through the information in each module and view the videos. At the end of the modules, there is a training evaluation. Fill out that form and upload it. Just follow the directions, and this will serve as your documentation that you've completed the training. Also, feel free to refer back to the modules or look through the resources that we've provided that give you some ideas to make your sessions as productive and as fun as possible.
Tutoring has many benefits, not only for students, but for you as a tutor as well. When you tutor your students, you will both become a team. Your students will not only gain content knowledge, but they'll be gaining the opportunity to work one-on-one with you, something that they often are missing at school. This will improve self-esteem and hopefully their motivation when they do go back to their classes. It will also improve their organizational skills. You as a tutor will get a better understanding of subject knowledge. You'll gain empathy for the students that you're working with and a sense of joy as you watch your students grow. The students you'll be tutoring have no say in the cards that they're dealt with in the game of life. You as their tutor can be their wild card. You can be the one card that holds the key to their success. Get to know your students. Share your hobbies, your interests. Ask them to share theirs. Repeat this at subsequent sessions. It keeps them engaged. Stay positive. Keep your environment comfortable. Do your students like to hear music when they're working? Do they need earplugs at times? Keep it comfortable, keep it happy. Be sure to encourage your students, even on tough days, because there will be some. Always end on a good note. Make a goal for the next time and make sure that they have something to look forward to. But remember to enjoy.
So it's time to get started with your session. Well, regardless of the type of day you've had, it is so important that you come to the session with a positive attitude and greet your student with enthusiasm. So when you begin, shake their hand, welcome them, and start asking questions about their life. Now, some students that you come around are very talkative and chatty, and remember, you are on a schedule. So if your time seems to be running on because you're spending a lot of time talking, you might want to set a timer, like a 5-minute timer, and that way you're also teaching your student organization skills. Now, at the very beginning of the tutoring, you need to get to know your student and their organization skills. And one of the easiest ways to do that is do a backpack check. So when you open that backpack and you see everything just stuffed in there, just take time and unload the backpack. Might even bring a couple extra folders so that if they need to organize some of their papers, you can help them organize. The deal is you want the student, when they go to school, to have the best possible day. And if they're not organized and the teacher is not happy with, well, where'd you put this? Well, I put it in my backpack. Well, that's not really helpful. So you want to do everything you can to prepare them for a good day. And one of the best things you can do for them is help them get organized. Another thing I always say is bring a bag of tricks. That might mean to maybe have a book that they might be interested in. You might have a game, puzzles, just something that if they don't come with anything, it gives you something to do. And sometimes they need a distraction and are having a really hard time with some of the work that they're doing. You can take a break and say, hey, let's read this book together. So remember, your role as a tutor is to be a listener. You might have to be an organizer. You definitely need to be an empathizer. But most of all, your role as a tutor is primarily to help the students with their academics. During each session, it's important to spend some time evaluating what it is that the student really needs. It's often helpful to break down their assignments into small parts and set goals. For instance, if they have 10 math problems that they need to finish, maybe just setting a goal for finishing 3 and then taking a quick break. Setting goals is important with students. It helps them feel that they are capable of learning, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment. In your modules, I've given you a set of SMART goals, which helps keep a focus by providing a set of boundaries and actions that you can do to achieve each goal.
Thank you, Dr. Stribling and Dr. Clear. Now I'd like to introduce Autumn Hand from the Children's Advocacy Center of Greater West Texas. She's an expert in identifying abuse and neglect. She'll be telling you some issues to be aware of, explaining what to do, and how to handle the situation. Please keep in mind that these children are already under placement with Child Protective Services. There has already been some form of abuse or neglect. Autumn can explain the details.
Hi, my name is Autumn Hand, and I work at the Children's Advocacy Center of Greater West Texas. And today I'm going to talk to you about recognizing and reporting child abuse. This is so important in everyday life, and especially in your job as a WHIT tutor. So I'm going to give you some signs, some symptoms, and definitions of the different types of child abuse. I like to always start out with some statistics, mostly because it is the most important thing and it really shows you how big of an issue child abuse is, not only in your community, but also in the state of Texas. Only 1 in 10 children will actually tell someone about their abuse. This is so important to know because that doesn't mean that those kids weren't showing signs, they weren't showing symptoms, but it just means that nobody noticed it and maybe that child never told anyone about it. 90% of the time, children are abused by someone they know, they love, they trust. So this could be an uncle, an aunt, brother, sister, family friend. It could be anyone close to that child. This one is especially important to me because I grew up in a time when stranger danger was the big thing that everyone talked about. And while 10% of the time that is true, stranger danger does happen, 90% of the time it's a perpetrator that's close to the child, and that's so important to know. In 2021, over 200 Texas children died due to abuse and neglect, and that's an increase from the previous year. I think we can all agree that 200 Texas children is 200 too many. And it's just important that we keep a lookout. We're able to recognize signs, we're able to recognize symptoms because child abuse is prevalent and it kills. Statistically, by the end of today, 184 children will have been abused in some way, shape, or form. So whether that's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or neglect, or some combination of the 4 of them, 184 children will be abused in the state of Texas. So keep these statistics in mind as we go through this training. In 2021, over 200 Texas children died due to abuse and neglect, and that's actually an increase from the previous year. This is important to know because 200 Texas children is 200 children too many. This is just a scary statistic and it's so important to know and be on the lookout and be able to recognize signs and symptoms so we can hopefully prevent these deaths. Some signs and symptoms of physical abuse are bruises and cuts, especially in areas like we call non-bony prominences. So this can mean bruises on your upper thigh, your fatty parts of your leg, your butt, maybe your hips. Places where the clothes cover are typically where we see those unordinary bruises and cuts. Of course, broken and fractured bones is a sign. A lot of times we see kids with broken and fractured bones who might not go to the doctor for it, so they're kind of stuck with a broken and fractured limb. Burns and scalds is typically common, especially cigarette burns, and again, they're going to be on hidden places on the body, so upper arm or the sleeves cover, areas like that. Bite marks is another big sign, and then of course we'll see signs like vomiting, drowsiness, and seizures. Those are all very common when it comes to physical abuse, especially because they're kind of a symptom of what is happening to them in the home. And then of course we have emotional issues that happen because of physical abuse. So things like anxiety and depression really can affect a kiddo. We might have a really outgoing kiddo, and once the abuse starts, we see them become really quiet, withdrawn, and just a totally different person. So keep that in mind. Delinquent behavior is another thing we see, and so that can range from that child potentially acting out on other kids, becoming a bully, things like that, to using alcohol, drugs, things like that, maybe getting in trouble with the law. It kind of all depends on age range, but delinquent behavior is what we like to say. And then of course, we know that children who are abused statistically have a higher percentage of getting addicted to drugs, alcohol, or some other form of substance abuse. So keep that in mind, and remember, that's what physical abuse looks like, and those are some of the signs and symptoms you should look for. Another type of abuse is sexual abuse, and unfortunately this is one of the more common types of abuse. And we define sexual abuse as any unwanted sexual activity with a perpetrator, typically using force or making threats, and sometimes taking advantage of victims who can't give consent legally. And the reason I say unwanted sexual activity and not just sexual contact is because not only is it considered sexual abuse if you're physically touching a child or having intercourse with a child. Of course, that is sexual abuse. But there's other forms such as showing a child pornography or creating pornography with the child. All of those, whether there's contact or non-contact, are considered sexual abuse. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind it's one of the more common types of abuse that you might see. Some signs and symptoms you might see of a child who has been sexually abused is avoiding being alone with someone who they typically used to like to be around. So whether they don't want to be around grandpa anymore, or maybe older sister moved back in the home and they're avoiding them. They don't want to go home, or they don't want to be around that person anymore. That's definitely something to question. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that it's always a type of abuse. However, it does mean that something is going on with that child. Why don't they want to be around this person? So make sure you question those things. Another big sign that we see is that child having knowledge of language and sexual acts that they might not have had before. So a child knowing sexual terms when they're way too young to be knowing what that means are really big signs and symptoms we might see of a child who's been sexually abused. Along with that, we typically see these children acting out that behavior, whether they're acting it out with their toys and their Barbie dolls, or maybe they're acting it out with other kids. These are all things we might see. And then of course, having nightmares and bedwetting is a huge sign. That's kind of one of the first things you see is bedwetting, night terrors, when typically that child was fine before. Changes in eating habits is a big sign as well. It changes their mood, and so maybe they're eating a lot more or a lot less, just depending on how it affects them from child to child. We also see changes in mood. A lot of times irritability, anger, we see these kids become bullies, all sorts of things. And just really anything out of the ordinary from how that child used to be. Of course, bruising, bleeding, discomfort in their private areas, especially for young kids. A lot of times we've seen STDs come to children who have been sexually abused. So any discomfort and extra touching in these areas is something to look out for. Again, doesn't always necessarily mean sexual abuse, but it definitely means something's going on. So be on the lookout for that. And then of course, STDs and pregnancy. It's really uncomfortable to talk about, but that is something we've seen before with children who have been sexually abused. So be on the lookout for these things because it is so prevalent. Next, we're going to talk about neglect. Neglect is the failure of a parent or caregiver to provide a child's basic needs. And basic needs can be a wide range of things. It can be physical needs, so they're not getting food, they're not getting proper hygiene and clothing and things like that. It can be medical, so a child breaking their leg and maybe not going to the doctor for that. Maybe a child has the flu and they're not getting taken care of for that. It can be educational, so not sending the child to school or homeschooling them and they're not getting proper education. And even emotional needs, neglecting a child's emotional needs. So they're going through a hard time, maybe a parent passed away and the other parent is just not taking care of them. All of these can be big signs of neglect. So be on the lookout for that, and those are the different types of neglect we could see. Like I said, poor hygiene and medical issues and delays. Of course, like I said, change in behavior. Typically with children who are neglected, we see them extra clingy. They don't want to leave their teacher or their WHIT tutor in your case. They want to constantly be around someone. They don't want to go home where they're going to be neglected. We often see these children have difficulty in relationships. So if you're working with an older kid, a lot of times you might see they have problems forming friendships, romantic relationships, and just holding on to those connections because they were neglected when they were younger, and it's kind of carried over because they've never learned how to form that bond. So keep that in mind, especially when you're tutoring them, because it can be hard. Just understand that neglect plays a big role in that. And then, of course, like I said earlier, delinquent behavior. If no one's at home to watch them, who knows what could happen? Who knows what they could get into? So things like crime, drug and alcohol use, all sorts of things like that can be a sign of neglect. So keep in mind that those are signs and symptoms of neglect to look out for. Next, we're going to talk about emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is any type of abuse that involves continual emotional mistreatment of a child. So basically, tearing down the self-esteem of a child is emotional abuse. This is one of the hardest types of abuse to prove, mostly because all these other types of abuse that I've told you about so far, you can see signs of them. You can see a bruise on a child. You can see if a child's been sexually assaulted through use of exams. You can see signs of neglect if a child is hungry or they don't have the correct amount of clothes. But with emotional abuse, it's all in the head. It's all emotional signs. So a child that's been emotionally abused can sometimes just look like a child who doesn't want to sit in their seat, a child who's having behavioral issues, when it might be a sign of emotional abuse. So keep that in mind. Some signs and symptoms you might see is a child who's unconfident or has a lack of self-assurance. So this would really show up during your tutoring sessions. Maybe, I'm so dumb, I can't do this, I don't understand why I don't get it. Because they're not being shown that love, that nurturing, that caring at home. So it's up to you to kind of build them up because they might not be getting that anywhere else. Struggle to control their emotions is a huge one. Again, a lot of times these kids who have been emotionally abused have been seen as just problem children, especially if there's no other types of abuse going on. Because they don't know how to regulate their emotions, especially because parents weren't regulating their emotions at home, so they never learned how to do that. We often see that they also have difficulty maintaining relationships because they've had a poor relationship growing up when they were babies with their parents, so as they grow, it's harder for them to form relationships with other people. A lot of times we see these kids act in a way that's inappropriate for their age, so a lot of times we see them kind of regress to baby-like behaviors, talking like a baby, things like that, just to get attention and hopefully positive attention that they weren't getting beforehand from their parents. And then, of course, attention-seeking and delinquent behavior is another sign. You might have noticed there's a pattern in how it affects them emotionally. No matter the type of abuse, the child is going to be affected. There was a study done called the ACE study a couple years ago, and it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And essentially what that whole study was about is about how when you have adverse experiences when you're a child, it affects you for the whole rest of your life. Statistically, it makes your brain stem grow smaller and you just have trouble sitting in your seat, have trouble doing things. So as you're working with these kids, especially because you as a WHIT tutor are working with kids in the foster care system, know that they've gone through something. There's a reason they're in the foster care system. And they've probably experienced some type of abuse or neglect. And if you're wondering, oh, I just can't get this kid to focus, or we're having trouble, with this one thing, keep in mind that they've gone through things and that's affecting how their brain works, that's affecting how their emotions are. Just keep that in mind as you go through your tutoring sessions because they're going through something and it's really important that you know that. Finally, we're going to talk about what you should do if a child comes and makes an outcry to you. Of course, right now you are all in the WHIT program and you are all working with kids who are specifically in foster care. So hopefully we've gotten these kids to a safer situation, but it still happens and you might still have to deal with a child if they outcry to you. And this is so important that you know how to talk to them because talking to a child the wrong way when they tell you about abuse can affect an investigation forever, and it can really mess things up. So If a child talks to you about their abuse, make sure that you listen to them carefully and you thank them for telling you. You really want to foster an encouraging and positive environment. Even though it's a scary topic, you want that child to know that A, they can trust you, and B, that you're listening to them and you can help them. So listen carefully, tell them, thank you for telling me, I appreciate, we're gonna get you help. Use those positive, encouraging words with them. Always let them know that it's not their fault and that they've done the right thing. That's really important. Some don'ts that you don't want to do. You don't want to confront their abuser. Same thing, you might not even want to confront their foster parent, their teacher. You don't want to confront anyone about it. If you do have questions or you want to tell someone about it, you can contact Jennifer or someone else in the WHIT program, and they should be able to give you that information and talk you through it, rather than telling the abuser or the parent, because really it just muddies all the water. We don't want you to make any promises to that child. Things like, it won't happen again. You can't make that promise to a child. Unfortunately, even though we don't want it to happen again, sometimes it might. So we can't make a promise like that. Same thing, you can't promise you're not going to tell anybody about the abuse, because in the state of Texas, we are all mandated reporters, especially people that work with kids. So you can't make that promise. So make sure that while you're encouraging them and telling them you're going to get them help, don't make those promises. We're also not asking you to investigate at all. We really want you to talk to that child with non-leading questions, is what we say, or really just open-ended questions. Get the basic information. We don't want you asking questions like, well, did your dad do this here? Or where did they do this? And, because eventually it muddies the water so much that you make your report with the questions that you got from the child and the information you got. And then that child will go get forensically interviewed at a CAC. And the stories don't quite line up from what you wrote in your report and what the child said. So we have a bit of difference there. And in the end, the attorneys for the bad guy can make it look like, there's not quite the same story in this case. And it can really muddy the investigation and make it a lot harder to prosecute. So really just ask them, tell me what happened, where, who, why, but nothing further than that. So keep that in mind. If a child does tell you anything, you don't want to affect the investigation. Always make sure you make that report as soon as possible. I believe in Texas, it is 48 hours that you have to tell and make that report. And it's so, so important that you do and follow through, because that is how children get help. That is how we can make sure that it doesn't happen to them again. So make sure you're doing these things if a child does come to you to tell you, hey, something's happening at home. So after all this information, you're probably wondering, how do I report? I'm seeing it happen, where should I make a report? So in the state of Texas, there's 2 different places you can make a report. The phone number is 1-800-252-5400, or you can go to www.txabusehotline.org. So there's 2 different ways you can do it. Both of them are 24/7, and it's really your prerogative whether you like to talk on the phone or you want to make a website visit and create a login and do all of that. Up to you. And then I always encourage you to tell your direct supervisor. So whether that, if you're at a workplace, your boss, or whether you're letting Jennifer know, a lot of times you're going to be in contact with the CPS supervisor for your foster child in the WHIT program. Reach out to them and let them know as well. So that way they're aware of what's going on, that you made a report. It's also important to know that in the state of Texas, you're not allowed to let someone make a report for you. So if you see the abuse happening, or if a child comes to you directly to tell you about their abuse, you have to be the one to report it. You can't pass it off to someone else and say, hey, I saw this, you report it. You have to be the one to tell them. So keep that in mind. And it's so important that you do, because you are protecting children. Also remember, if a child is in immediate danger, make sure you call 911. Immediate danger can be a child is going home to harm themselves, they're going home to harm someone else, or they're going home directly to an abuser and abuse could happen again. So if you feel like it's a dangerous situation like that, you can call 911 and then make your report afterwards. So keep that in mind, and always make sure you follow through and make that report. Now, I just have some final thoughts about when you should report if you see abuse. Obviously, you don't need concrete proof. We are not asking for photographic evidence. We're not asking for any specific proof, but we just want a reasonable suspicion. So if you have a gut feeling, go ahead and report it. If CPS goes out there and turns out there's no abuse happening, that's a good day. That means a child's not being abused, and you were just doing your due diligence to make sure children in our community in the state of Texas are safe. Know that there is a law called the Good Samaritan Law, that if you make a report of abuse and it turns out after investigation that no abuse was present, you can't be held liable. So nobody can turn around and sue you. You won't get sent to jail as long as you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart through good faith. As soon as a child discloses, make sure you make that report, because again, that's how we protect children. And of course, like I said earlier, if the child is in immediate danger, call 911. That is all I have about how to recognize and report child abuse. Please keep this information in mind, because it is so, so important, especially as you work with children in the foster care system. We want to make sure that we are protecting children ages 0 to 18 and make sure they're not suffering from any type of abuse. Thank you for your time, and congrats on becoming a WHIT tutor.
Thank you, Autumn. We hope you found this interesting and educational. Next, I'd like to cover some steps that we require of you, what to expect, and how to start the program. Once you've emailed us, we accept you as an applicant. You already know about the information you've received. You should have received our background checks, confidentiality forms, and returned them to us. You also have received a password, so you know how to get on the Tutor training site. Now, you know about teaching your student and how to recognize abuse and neglect. Let's cover some basics of the WHIT program steps. 1. If you're doing in-person tutoring, you'll meet at the public library, school, or university campus, or the designated place that you and our program agreed upon. It will depend on the county in which you're tutoring. This place has been designated because they have cameras and safety measures that have been provided for you and your student. You're not allowed to find your own facility. If there's a problem, just call one of the contacts we've provided, or please reschedule. You're not allowed to transport your student at any time under any circumstances. You're required to meet with your student for 1 hour once a week. We set that as our standard, but realize things can happen that change or prohibit this. We also offer remote tutoring. You are allowed to do this, but we prefer face-to-face. You can choose to do this because of your location or transportation issues. Please know that at any time, your session may be monitored for professional purposes, so please adhere to polite and proper etiquette for remote meetings. It's possible you might have to teach your child about this as well. Also, you can teach them how to use the tools. Some might not know how to use what's available to them, and this would be really helpful for their future. We prefer you use Teams or Zoom only. Plan to be as flexible as you can with your time. Foster parents and biological parents can be limited with scheduling. If you have a difficult time with this, please let us know by calling or emailing Sissy Anderson or Carolyn Loper. Now let's go over weekly documentation. Once you've met with your student, you'll be required to document what you worked on and answer the questions on the database or the fillable form. For the database, we will send a password, login, and your child will automatically be there with their information. Just fill in the form. If the database isn't available yet, you'll receive a form from us that you fill out or email to Sissy Anderson. This is the form. Make sure you fill in all the information, and please go into some detail about what you worked on and if they have any concerns. We need these reports not just to track the progress of the foster students, but also for our funding purposes. In the past, this is how we found whether they could possibly have a learning disability or they just truly are behind. If you notate this, it notifies us, and we give this information to CPS. This gives CPS and the school a chance to test them if needed. If the database is up and running, you can do all this online, including from your phone. If you're filling a fillable form out, please email it to sissyanderson@whitprogram.org. If a session gets canceled, email Sissy Anderson and let her know. This will change when we get our database up. You'll be able to notate it right there. Please put when your next session is scheduled, and you'll want to do this when the caregiver picks up your student. They can be difficult to reach during the week, so I recommend setting a date while you have them there in front of you. Also, we do keep a spreadsheet of when each of our tutors meet. So if there's no record of your session, we assume you haven't met. I can't express to you enough how important the reports are. You're our link to what's happening with the foster child. Without your diligence and your reports, we have nothing. This is the single most important obligation next to tutoring. We must have your reports. If our database is up, which it should be, this next information won't matter. Please only send the fillable form to Sissy Anderson. If caseworkers, CPS, family, or foster parents ask for it, please tell them to contact the WHIT program. We will handle this situation for you, as volunteers have enough to deal with already. We don't want to trouble you with one more task. Only send your documentation to Sissy. It's extremely confidential, and we'll discuss confidentiality rules in a moment. Just know it's completely against the rules to share this information with absolutely anyone. If at any time you have questions or concerns about the weekly documentation, email Sissy Anderson. Now, let's discuss rules about confidentiality. This content is provided by the Children's Advocacy Center of Greater West Texas. The first rule of being a WHIT program tutor for a foster child is you don't disclose any information about the foster child outside of the WHIT program. The basis of the relationship of trust we have with Child Protective Service and foster care case management organizations is that we will protect the confidentiality of the children in foster care and in our program. This portion of the training will give you the tools and help you understand the rules regarding confidentiality and your obligation to keep information confidential. Let's talk about the basics. This is the confidentiality agreement that you have already signed or will sign with us. What it is, it's a legal contract or part of a contract between at least two parties that outlines the confidential material, knowledge, or information that the parties wish to share with one another for certain purposes. What you learn about a child or a family is not to be shared with anyone, including family and close friends. Protect any type of information that is not generally known. Here's a list of some information that shouldn't be shared. The first thing is the child's story. You probably won't want to be privy to this anyway, but if you are, it's not to be used or shared, so please don't repeat it. What is next for the child? We don't want anybody knowing what our plans are other than what you put on your paper, on your report, and that's all that you're supposed to fill out. That's all you'll need to say about your child. How you're helping the child, that stays between you and us as the WHIT program as well. What you know isn't working for the child, you're going to report that on your report when you're done with your tutor session, and what the child might say. This needs to stay private. You don't have to report everything that they say, but you should put anything important down on your session report. Let's talk about some items that are confidential. Here are some facts and items that shouldn't be shared. These are things you don't need to know about, and you're not allowed to ask, really, with the exception of the last one. This, obviously, you must know. So, names, date of birth, age, sex, address, you don't need to ask any of those questions because number one, you're not going to be transporting this child anyway. Current contact details of the family or guardian, you will need to know that, but they're confidential. Medical history doesn't concern us. Personal care issues doesn't concern us unless you think there's some kind of a neglect going on. Service records and file progress notes, individual personal plans, and as far as assessments or reports, the only report that you'll need is the one that we give you and the one that you're recording on our website. Educational knowledge, that's the only thing you'll need, and you write down everything that we talked about earlier on your report. Basic guidelines with disclosures. You might be the recipient of abuse information from a child. As Autumn Hand said, these are some ways to respond. Always keep in mind you're a volunteer and you're not their friend. You need to keep an appropriate relationship. Do not share personal social media accounts with the child. This is an inappropriate thing to do and not allowed with our tutors. It is definitely a breach of our contract, and it will disqualify you from being a volunteer in our program. Immediately report any inappropriate communication from the child. This you need to let us know about. This needs to be on your session report as well as an email or a phone call to us. Protect the child, protect yourself. This means when information is repeated, and this includes to their guardian, it can damage a case if there's an investigation happening, or it can lead you and the WHIT program ending up in a courtroom. Obviously, this isn't what we want, so at all times, protect your child and protect yourself. Here are some great tips for a successful time being a WHIT program tutor. Remember, most of these kids have been pulled out of their home. They are having and have had a really difficult time. You can help them by being a giving role model. Find something in common with them, like a pet or a hobby or a sport. This is a good conversation piece and will bond you more. Celebrate their accomplishments. If they tell you something that they've accomplished, like a good test grade or a grade that they're proud of on their report card, go ahead and celebrate it and make a big deal out of it. Positive reinforcement will help them stay motivated. See the impact. You will see your student change. This is because of the work you as tutors are doing. So please understand that you're doing a great job and don't get frustrated. They're developing trust and confidence because of what you're doing and how you're teaching them. Along with watching this PowerPoint, you should have been sent your confidentiality form. It came with your background check form. This must be signed before you can become a tutor. Any breach of this contract will disqualify you as one of our tutors. Any improper disclosure of confidential information could imperil our program. CPS and community-based care programs have entrusted us with this private information, and we really want to honor this rule. The guardians will be the main point of communication. You will get the guardian's information once you are matched with your child. The first communication should happen like this. Once you receive the information on your child, please contact the guardian by phone and by email. Identify who you are and that you're the new tutor with the WHIT program. When you do this, please schedule a session right away. You can ask what they're struggling with and ask them to bring their homework, or in some cases, whatever they're working on in school. You'll find that they sometimes don't bring their work. Remember what our education specialist said, always bring a backup. For information on ideas on what to do if this happens, you can refer to our website under Tutor Resources, or refer to our education specialists on this video. You may also want to call or email Carolyn Loper, who has been a tutor for us and could possibly troubleshoot for you as well. For the first session, the guardian may want to stay and listen. This is completely acceptable for trust purposes. Once they've seen your session, you may prefer that they not stay for the next session depending on the child's behavior. We found that most students will be able to focus more if they're not there. Most guardians will want to go run errands, and you may want to discuss this with them later, but not in front of your student. Make sure you always have their contact number before they leave in case of any changes or any emergencies. Once you're there with your student, you or they are not allowed to go outside or leave the premises, and you must stay in contact with your child at all times. If your guardian is late picking up, don't panic. We haven't had this happen, but if you become concerned or can't reach your caregiver, please call a CPS worker or me at the number you have on file. You'll want to keep the WHIT program phone numbers on your phone. You aren't allowed to leave your child because the caregiver is being late. Once again, you must stay with your child at all times, so please keep this in mind when you're scheduling. If you have questions or concerns regarding your student's guardian, email or call Carolyn Loper or Sissy Anderson. Let's discuss the relationship you should have with your student. Always remember your priority needs to be their academics. You shouldn't have any contact with the student outside of tutoring sessions. Only email, text, or call their guardian or their biological parent, but only if the biological parent has custody. Also, there's no social media allowed with your child or that identifies your child. In other words, you can put, I'm tutoring for the WHIT program on social media. You just can't put, I'm tutoring John Smith for the WHIT program. Be respectful, responsible, and mature when you're with your students. Never shame your students for poor grades or behavioral choices. Be patient and positive with your student. If you're struggling with your student, you can email or call Carolyn Loper or Sissy Anderson. We also have Dr. Stribling and Dr. Clear to answer academic questions as well. Their information is on our website. Trauma information. Remember that all students in foster care have experienced trauma. The majority have been pulled from their home, and some have no clue why. Our education specialist has covered most of this with you, but if you feel you need more advice, you can call, email, or look on our website under Tutor Resource, whichever is easiest for you. Regarding our Tutor Resource page, there's a page on the website that you'll have access to titled Tutor Resources. You'll receive the username and password to this page when you're accepted to the program. It'll be different from the one testing password that you received. This is a refresher page where you can look at some of the materials we've covered today, as well as where you can access tools and resource for help if needed. If you don't know what your child should be knowing at their grade level, that information is on there as well. You also have each and every one of us at the WHIT program here to answer questions, including our education specialists. Now, just for some follow-up information. Once you've been approved to become a tutor, please know that it can take up to 1 month to receive your child. If you get concerned, feel free to email or call. Now, at some time during your tutoring of that child, we recommend taking them on a tour of your college. The reason is that they've never had any exposure, and it can be very intimidating. One of the reasons they chose not to attend college, or choose not to attend college, is the lack of knowing what's expected, and they don't want to fail. Remember what got them to us in the first place. It's fear-based and lacks exposure to education. When you do this, you must have their guardian or possibly their caseworker with you. Make it fun, make it exciting, and make it full of possibilities. Let them know that Texas has free college tuition for every child that's been in DFPS systems. There are also programs available that pay for their housing and living expenses. If they show interest, have them speak with their teacher, their caseworker, even you if they're interested. You can also refer them to us. We've had several students that are thriving and going to take advantage of this. We at the WHIT program have had many success stories. I'd really like to introduce you to one of our volunteers who was Volunteer of the Year, Carolyn Loper. Carolyn has helped several foster children improve their grades, and she's had the privilege of learning from experience. She can share with you some great things that can be really beneficial to you. Carolyn?
Thank you, Jennifer. This fall, I had the opportunity to begin tutoring through the WHIT program. I was matched with a sophomore in high school, and when she came to me, she was really struggling with her grades. She was bright and motivated, but her grades were low, and I was confused as to why that was. Whenever we started talking, I began to realize that her circumstances had been beyond challenging. I know that if I had been through some of the situations that she had been through, I would be struggling too. As our sessions continued, I began to point her eyes in the direction of her future, to help her see how her grades were going to impact what her life choices could be. She had mentioned to me our first session that she really wanted to be a nurse, and I sort of had to show her that in order to be a nurse, you had to go to college, something she had never considered or realized. After the first few sessions, I saw a real change in attitude and a change in her grades in the class. She told me that she had began focusing on her studies, not only because she wanted to go to college and be a nurse, but also because she wanted to be able to participate in athletics at her school. We set this as a semester goal so that she would be able to play in softball this spring. She worked hard and got her grades up at the mid-semester. During the second semester, her grades continued to climb. She was making A's in all of her classes, except for chemistry, but I know we all struggle with that one. Not only had her grades improved, but her behavior had improved as well. She was able to play on her softball team, and she hopes to play volleyball next fall. She is excited about her future and has plans to go to college and get her degree so that she can become a nurse and help others. She was able to completely turn her life around in just one school year of tutoring. All I did was meet with her for 1 hour each week, and her life has been changed forever. She now has a future and many, many opportunities when she enters adulthood. Thank you all for volunteering your time and your effort to help these children. It's been a great experience, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. Now I'd like to close this education course with some final words from our Vice President, attorney, and co-founder of this program, Mr. Jeff Lisson. Once again, I thank you all for taking the time to be here. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Lisson. I'm an attorney with a law firm in San Angelo, Texas, and I'm Vice President and co-founder of the WHIT program. First, we need to thank the Children's Advocacy Center of Greater West Texas and Heather Ward and Justin Deloche for their support of our program and for allowing us to use their facilities. Jennifer and I started the WHIT program because we firmly believe that foster children who are behind in school due to no fault of their own deserve a chance to have a happy and successful life. We want to break the cycle of abuse and neglect that these children were born into. And we believe one major component of breaking that cycle and preparing foster children for success is education. You all are part of a great experiment, an experiment to see if a group of dedicated volunteers doing nothing more than teaching basic math and English, the basic skills needed to succeed in our society, can improve these foster children's lives and futures. We at the WHIT program bet that we can, and with your help we will, one foster student at a time. There are 29,000 foster children in Texas and 400,000 in the United States. You can't help every one of them, but you can change the life of one foster child. And together, we can change the lives of many of them, or most of them, or even all of them. Thank you for embarking on this adventure with us. We couldn't do it without you.
Next up, we're just going to have a casual conversation with our educational consultants and our president here about some questions that I myself have had as a tutor and questions that also I've heard that my peers have had. So let's start with some questions. This one right here is a very common question, and it's one that I myself had. It is, what do I do if my student shows up without any homework?
Well, that could definitely be a problem. They're supposed to be coming to get work, help with their homework and things like that, but sometimes they're just going to show up without anything. That's where your bag of tricks comes in. Have a book ready for them. Maybe it's your favorite book that you want to share with them. Oftentimes, the setting that you're going to be tutoring in is the library, so there's a whole world of books around them, and this is another time to kind of find out what they're interested in. Look around in the library. You can come up with a little game. You can refer to several resources that are on the website if you need help coming up with ideas for puzzles or games. What else do y'all think?
My first tutoring session with my student, she came to me and she had nothing. I was already nervous because she was a little bit late and I didn't know which one she was going to be or how she was going to know what I looked like. And then she sat down and I said, "Okay, do you have your backpack?" And she said, "No." And I was like, oh wow, we got 50 minutes left, and she said no. So what I did personally is we just started talking about what her hopes and goals were for the future, maybe what she wanted to be when she grew up, and we also talked about she wanted to be involved in athletics, and some of her choices had prevented her from being involved in athletics. So we talked about maybe what we could do to get there, and we were able to even start some goals just right away without even seeing any of her homework or talking about academics. So really just taking the time to get to know your student. So if your student shows up without any work, it could just be a great opportunity to start getting to know them more.
And if you need help with coming up with those questions, I've included a list of questions in one of the modules that you can refer to.
On the website, we do have a list of websites that have some free games. So if you know your child's grade level or maybe their skill level, you could start looking around and see if you can get them interested in some educational games. So I know I've heard a lot of my friends who are tutors say that their students show up without any pencils or without any like notebook paper to write assignments down on. And they're on a college kid budget, so they can't really go out and just buy their kids a whole set of school supplies. So what would you recommend?
Yes, so I can tell you that the WHIT program will supply these kids with whatever they need. You, as a tutor, just call me, call Sissy, call Carolyn. Let us know that your child can't afford or needs supplies, and we'll send you out on a little shopping spree, which will be great. And then just shoot us a text of your receipt, and we'll reimburse you, whether it's from Bevmo or PayPal, but we'll get you reimbursed for that. We don't ever want these kids to go without school supplies because they can't afford them. We want to provide them with that. We've also had tutors say, I need flashcards. My child can't identify. We can supply you with flashcards. Whatever you need, just call me, call somebody, let us know, and we'll be able to do that for you. So
Another question that I've heard asked a lot is, what should I do if I suspect my student has a learning disability, such as dyslexia?
Well, what we need to do if you suspect something is to notate that on your tutoring form at the end of your session so that we as a WHIT program can alert the proper authorities. Our program is designed for children who have not been diagnosed with a learning disability, so we just want to make sure that others are aware of it so that we can follow through.
I know one thing I've heard from tutors, they complain, I don't think my student likes me. What do you do if you feel like a student doesn't like you? Have you had that experience before?
My student personally was always very respectful and polite, but I did get the feeling that she didn't want to be there very often, especially our first few sessions. She would ask, like, I don't even need a tutor, why am I here? She was a little just generally uninterested in the whole school thing, and I think it's really important to remember their background and where they're coming from. When you have a lot of things going on in your home life, it can be hard to make education a priority. And I personally grew up very privileged where I didn't have those additional concerns, so it was hard for me to picture her viewing school as something so insignificant. But when I was able to put myself in her shoes and really just remember where she's coming from and her circumstances, it began to make a lot more sense that maybe school wasn't her top priority. It was my job just to remind her that her education is going to help her in her adult life and help open doors to her future. The main thing that helped me, I'd say, is remembering that her attitude and her choices weren't about me and what I was doing. They had much more to do with her background and what she had been through. So I tried not to take it personally and just stayed patient.
I think those are really good. That's really, really good advice. One thing I always tell my own students as they become on their journey of being teachers, you can't always judge somebody by their rest face. Sometimes it may have a frown, or they're just sitting there and they just are, you just think, oh, they don't like me. Again, it's not all about me. It's just that there's a lot of things going on. So that's where humor and trying to distract them and ask them questions and finding out more about them, that'll get them more animated, and you can then hopefully then transition into doing their academic work. So what happens when you as a tutor do not understand the assignment or the problem?
You know, this actually happened to me a lot when I was tutoring. So what I did was I went on Khan Academy. First of all, Khan Academy is a great resource. It's linked in our website.
did you do it during your session or after your session?
I actually did it before our session, like just knowing that she was going to be in chemistry and it was the beginning of the year. I sort of looked through there to see what skills they were learning, and they have quick recap videos that are 2 to 3 minutes long for each skill. I just watched a couple of those so I'd be prepared. And then during our session, if she had a question that she didn't know how to do, what we did is we went on YouTube and we typed in the exact problem, and 9 times out of 10, there was a video that would come up of a teacher teaching that problem, and we could just watch and we could learn together. And I think that was actually really a great skill that I was able to teach her, because that way she's not relying on me to learn new information. She's learning how to learn the new skills.
Yeah, you gave her the tools to investigate it herself. I think that's brilliant.
Yes.
If you're having a problem with really poor behavior, I would notify somebody at the WHIT program so that we know that it's a problem. You're going to have to deal with it right there. So usually there's a way to distract them, whether it's come here and sit down, let's play a game, or I'd prefer you didn't run around. If you sit down, I have candy, or I'll pay you, I'll make it right with you somehow. Bribery is not against the rules. Let's put it that way. So,
Candy
but
can go into your bag of tricks.
candy can go into your bag of tricks, absolutely. So,
And if you're going to put any type of candy, things like that, first of all, you do need to be careful. Students do have food allergies, things like that. So something like Lifesavers, Starburst, I believe they're called, just little individual wrap things, just something quick and easy and something that they may like. My students, quite frankly, always liked hot Cheetos, and they would work for one hot Cheeto at a time. So, find out what they like to eat, and maybe you can use that as a reward.
what else? There's so many questions.
What do you do when they cry?
I personally haven't had a child who has been crying, but I do know, even though our priority is to help them with their academics, and that's what we're all about here, if a child is so emotionally upset that they're crying, you might need to make sure that you're distracting them or just getting back to a place that they can really be able to learn. So maybe just saying, okay, we'll put your math homework aside for a moment and let's play a game, or let's just talk. Let's take a step back from whatever's really upsetting them in the moment and just be able to calm them down. Distractions go a long way. The bribing goes a long way.
Bribing is good.
Treats, games.
I would also say that sometimes they just need to be heard. I think that it's good to just listen to them and let them get it out for 5 minutes or so. I think that some people just need to cry, and let's face it, they've been through a lot, so let them cry, and then you might ask them, what are you frustrated about, if they haven't expressed to you already, and let them talk. It's not only are we teachers, but we have to be good listeners as well. So I think you can let them talk. Make sure that you don't probe them and ask them questions about their background. Just allow them to speak, and if they tell you something that's private, that's fine. Keep it to yourself, but please don't probe them and ask them what's wrong, what happened with your life. But I think sometimes it just pays to listen.
What do you do if a student tells the tutor, or tells you as a tutor, something that disturbs you? What are the next steps for the tutor?
That's a great question, because we've actually had that several times. If your child speaks of something, say in their foster family or in their biological family, if that's where they live, if there's an abuse statement made, you got that in the in the PowerPoint presentation that I had, so you know what to do with that. But you want to be very careful. Some kids will just cry out abuse, and others are serious. My situation with what we do, or your situation, I should say, is let us know. Give us a call. I don't think that that's an email right off. Give us a call. Give either Carolyn or Sissy or myself, and let us know what happened. We can direct you from there, but just listen and see what they have to say. But that's a great question with the abuse. You'll also, we gave you the information on the abuse hotline. If it's something that you feel like this child is in danger, and there's something threatening that child that they're going to go back to, immediately call the police, just immediately, and don't let them get back into that situation. That's my suggestion for that. That was a great question.
And I think in the modules and on the website, you'll find several areas that have phone numbers and things like that. Yes. Also, I also want to emphasize, if you have an educational question that Patsy and I could answer, just feel free to send us an email, and on the homepage of our modules is our email address. And so feel free to email us if you have a question. We'll do the best we can to answer it.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Next, you will need to take the tutor training assessment provided below. This assessment is mandatory and shows us that you've watched the video. Below the assessment, you will see the link to education modules. These modules provide additional information on the educational aspect of being a WHIT tutor. These modules are provided for your benefit and are not mandatory. You can access these modules at any time to refresh yourself on some of the material we covered today. Once again, thank you and good luck.